안녕하세요. 오늘 2주 이민자 인권 현황 및 이민자 권익 사회적 권리 보장 모색을 위한 국제 심포지엄에 오신 것을 환영합니다.
Good morning, everyone. We would like to welcome all of you to the 2008 Symposium, the movement of people building a new agenda from Asia to the US.
저는 LA 민족학교에서 이민자 권익 활동가로 일하고 있는 이정희이고요. 오늘 한국말 사회를 맡게 되었습니다. 제 옆에 계신 분은 시카고 한인교육문화 마당집에서 활동하고 계시는 임미라 씨이고요. 이분은 오늘 영어로 사회를 맡게 되셨습니다.
My name is Mira Im and I will be the English MC for today. I'm from Chicago and a member of the Korean American Resource and Culture Center. And to my right is Jung-hee Lee, the immigrant rights organizer of Korean Resource Center. She'll be the Korean MC for today's symposium.
이번에는 민족학교 설립 25주년과 광주 민중항쟁 28주년을 맞이하는 해입니다. 오늘 심포지엄은 2주 이민자의 인권 현황 및 사회적 권리 보장 모색을 위한 국제 심포지엄이라는 주제로 진행됩니다. 세계의 경제가 글로벌화되면서 일어나는 문제들과 이에 대한 깊은 이해가 필요한 시기에 본 심포지엄을 통해 진정한 사회 정의와 인권 운동이 무엇인지를 나눠보는 시간을 갖기로 하였습니다. 또 조국의 민주화와 인권 존중, 사회 정의를 위해 희생하신 선배님들의 정신을 이어받기를 원합니다. 더불어 이번 심포지엄을 위해서 호주, 아시아, 독일, 한국, 뉴욕, 시카고, 필라델피아 등지에서 참여하신 모든 분들, 연사분들께 감사의 말씀드립니다.
This year marks the 25th anniversary of Korean Resource Center, as well as the 28th anniversary of the Gwangju People's Uprising. The symposium is titled The Movement of People, Building a New Agenda from Asia to the US. Issues that rise as a result of global migration has surged exploitation to the immigrant communities, and it calls for global understanding and forming solidarity among different racial groups. This symposium has been organized to define global movement as shown in migration of people, and to encourage movement of people to make changes possible. Likewise, through this educational symposium, we hope to carry and relay the spirit of those that gave all that they have for the sake of human rights and social justice. We especially would like to thank all of our speakers and attendees that have traveled a long way from places of the world like Asia, Australia, Korea, Europe, and in the parts of US, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C.
이제 본 행사를 시작하기 전에 한국 5.18 재단에서 오신 윤광장 이사님과 미주 한인 봉사교육단체 협의회와 민족학교를 대표해서 이운숙 사무국장님이 환영 인사가 있겠습니다.
And before we move on to the symposium, we would like to have welcoming addresses by Mr. Kwang Jang-yeon, Board Chair of the May 18th Memorial Foundation, followed by Eun-suk Lee, Executive Director of the National Korean American Service and Education Consortium, and also representing Korean Resource Center.
안녕하십니까, 윤광장입니다. 다시 한번 인사드리렵니다. 먼저 제 축사를 하기 전에 여러분 앞에 한 가지 제가 다짐을 좀 하렵니다. 제가 14년 전 1994년에 역사 탐방의 일원으로 미국에 와서 한 20여일간 여기저기 역사 현장을 둘러보고 다닐 때는 그저 즐겁고 행복했습니다. 왜냐하면 사랑하는 동생 4분이 같이 있었기 때문이었습니다. 그러나 14년이 지난 오늘 이 LA에 와서 여러분 앞에서 이런 얘기를 하려고 하니까 말과 글로 표현할 수 없을 정도로 가슴이 뻥 뚫려 있고 머리는 무거운 납덩이가 짓누리는 그런 정말
괜찮아요.
착잡한 그런 심정입니다. 아마 오늘 이 시간도 하늘나라에서 동생이 내려다보면서 형 잘해. 내가 못한 일 형님이 좀 대신해줘 라고 좀 내려보고 있는 그런 시간일 겁니다. 그래서 저는 여러분 앞에서 다짐합니다. 제 삶이 그래왔지만 지금까지 동생이 걸어왔던 길, 해왔던 생각들 100% 동생을 대신할 수 없지만 조금이라도 그 대신해서 제 생을 마감할 때까지 열심히 동생의 뜻에 어긋나지 않고 버리지 않고 열심히 살아가고 생을 마감할 때까지 싸우겠다는 것을 여러분 앞에 다짐하면서 인사 말씀을 하겠습니다. 감사합니다. 오늘 이 자리에 서서 여러분께 인사를 드리라니 참으로 많은 생각들이 스치고 지나갑니다. 한평생을 조국의 민주화를 위해 열정을 바쳤고 망명생활을 하면서도 끊임없이 운동을 조직했던 동생 윤한봉의 땀과 혼이 서려있는 이곳 민족학교에서 기념사를 하려고 하니 목이 메어옵니다. 지난해 갑작스럽게 세상을 뜬 제 동생의 장례식에 먼 길 마다하지 않고 광주까지 와주신 여러분에게 진심으로 가족을 대표해서 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 바르게 살자, 굳세게 살자, 더불어 살자, 뿌리를 알자라는 교훈으로 시작되었던 민족학교가 5.18 진상규명투쟁과 통일운동 그리고 한인공동체를 포함한 미국 내 소수자의 권리와 인권 그리고 민족원을 일깨워주는 다양한 사업 속에서 성장해 왔습니다. 5.18 기념재단 역시 여러분의 적극적인 후원과 성원 속에서 발전해 왔습니다. 올해 처음 민족학교와 5.18 기념재단이 함께 28주년을 기념하는 행사를 하게 되어 진심으로 기쁘게 생각합니다. 저는 한평생을 교사로 재직하면서 제자들에게 민주주의를 가르쳐 왔습니다. 바른 역사를 가르치기 위해 세상의 불의와 타협하지 않고 살아왔습니다. 5월 광주와 우리들의 왜곡된 세상과 타협하지 않고 언제나 정의를 위해 투쟁할 때 해외에서 보내주신 피땀으로 이룬 성원이 없었더라면 오늘의 광주는 존재하지 않았을 것입니다. 지금 이곳 로스앤젤레스에서 행사가 열리는 시간 독일 밀레벨트에서도 제6유럽 5월 민중제 행사가 개최되고 있습니다. 또 이 자리에는 제6유럽 5월 민중제 대표단과 호주 민족문화교육원 대표도 참석하고 계십니다. 지난해 제6유럽 5월 민중제 공동행사에 이어 올해 민족학교와 공동행사까지 저희들은 회해동포 여러분의 노고를 항상 기억하고 있습니다. 다음에는 더 많은 분들이 모여 함께 5월을 이야기할 수 있는 기회가 되기를 희망합니다. 여러분의 조국은 지금 미국산 쇠고기 수입 문제로 국민들의 촛불을 들고 나와 연일 반대 집회를 하고 있습니다. 이 집회에는 기성세대가 아닌 어린 중고등학교 학생들이 수만 명이 참석하고 있습니다. 저는 이들이 사회 참여를 통해 미래의 희망을 보고 있습니다. 참으로 대견하게 생각합니다. 여러분의 조국을 위해 더 많은 성원과 지지를 부탁드립니다. 끝으로 오늘 행사에 참석해 주신 네 여러분과 행사 준비를 위해 수고해 주신 민족학교 관계자 여러분께 감사의 인사를 드립니다. 감사합니다.
Good morning. I've been asked to speak more specifically about the reason why we have this event today. And before I do, I wanted to recognize, first of all, the board chair of the Korean Resource Center and the board chair of NACASEC, who are both sitting in front. 이사장님, 홍기원 이사장님하고 이기주 이사장님. I just wanted to recognize. This is a very ambitious event for us, for such a small organization like NACASEC and KRC, and it's been quite a while since we've done a conference of all. So for us, we thought a lot about it, but we realized that not only are we marking KRC's 25th anniversary, but we're also living in a very politically defining moment. And it signaled to us the need for an event that would bring all generations of the Korean American community together, from children to youth to adults and our elders, immigrants and children of immigrants, and all our friends and neighbors to look at immigration and our immigrant experiences through new lenses that provide a richer, deeper, and broader perspective. Immigration is a global and national phenomenon and also complex, as you will learn today. There are 180 million people living outside their home countries, 100 million as migrant workers, and a little over 40 more years from now, it will be 500 million. In the U.S., there are now 37 million immigrants in the U.S., 27% of the population, and making up 1/6 of the nation's workforce. Also in the U.S., of that population, 12 million of them are undocumented, including 1.3 million children. This global and national phenomenon is also about us, not only because we are immigrants or children of immigrants, but because migration is really about people who see the opportunities in front of them and seek them to build a better life, whether it is neighborhood to neighborhood, state to state, or nation to nation. The organizations who organize this conference today believe that it is through organizing the leadership of people that change will happen. Some of us are old enough to have witnessed or have been a part of these recent examples of the people's movement, from the toppling of the racist apartheid regime in South Africa to military dictatorships in South Korea. Today, our great challenge is how receiving nations around the world would treat its immigrant and migrant workforce. Recent reports of rioting and discrimination and deportation of immigrant and migrant workers from Italy to South Africa and to South Korea mirror what we are doing in the U.S. Under a broken immigration system here, millions of workers and their families are being treated like second-class citizens, working underground to sustain the U.S. economy, but unable to drive, send their children to school, seek emergency hospital care, or even play in parks. To change the lives of immigrants, it is more than just passing immigration reform. We must create the conditions that will enable us to pass just and humane immigration reform laws. In the 21st century, the great challenge that faces us is to be critical but hopeful, to learn from each other in what is a unique opportunity for many of us to refortify our spirit and believe in ourselves, and also start to look for real solutions to the local and global problems that face us today. And so once again, we thank you for coming here today.
다음 순서로는 지금 이 시간 민주화와 사회 정의를 위해 희생되신 분들을 위한 묵념 시간을 갖기로 하겠습니다.
Thank you, Mr. Yoon and Ms. Lee. At this time, we'll have a moment of silence remembering those that staked their lives for the sake of democracy and social justice.
묵념.
Again.
이제부터 다음 순서로는 주제 발제 시간이 이어지겠습니다. 미주에서 피어난 5월 정신과 재미동포들의 조국 민주화 및 평화운동을 주제로 좌담회가 준비되어 있으며 지금 이 좌담회에는 전 재미 한국청년연합 회원이셨던 세 분의 패널이 나오셔서 발제를 해주시겠습니다. 그 세 분을 소개해드리겠습니다. 첫 번째 분은 국제건설목공노련 아시아 태평양 지역 프로젝트 코디네이터이신 이진숙님께서 해주시고요. 두 번째로는 미주연합감리교회 국제사업부 여성분과 사무국장 사무차장이신 이성옥님께서 해주시고요. 세 번째로는 전 민족학교 사무국장이신 이심임보 선생님께서 발제해 주시겠습니다. 이 좌담회의 진행은 현 민족학교 사무국장님이신 윤대중 씨가 진행을 맡아주시겠습니다.
So we will now move on to panel 1 discussion. It's titled Looking Back to Look Forward, a roundtable discussion looking back upon the history of democracy and peace movement as seen through the eyes of immigrants. The three panel members are actually former members of the Young Koreans United of USA, Jin-Suk Lee, the Regional Project Coordinator for the Asia Pacific Regional Office of the Building Wood Workers International, also called BWI, Sang-ok Lee, Assistant General Secretary of the Women's Division of General Board of Global Ministries of United Methodist Church, and Im Bo-shim, former Executive Director of Korean Resource Center. The panel discussion will be facilitated by Dae-jun Yoon, who is the current Executive Director of Korean Resource Center.
한평생 나가자던 뜨거운 맹세 도징지는 한데 없고 깃발만 남겨
안녕하세요. Good morning, everybody. 다 여기 그 귀에 그 통역기 쓰셨죠? Does everyone has a headset? So unless you are really total bilingual, today is the chance that you try the headset. Something you never experienced before. 오늘은 저희가 다 이중언어로 많이 하기 때문에요. 여기 통역기를 좀 쓰셔야지 저희가 오늘 진행되는 프로그램에 대해서 좀 잘 아실 수 있을 것 같습니다. 오늘 이렇게 토요일날 아침부터 이렇게 이런 귀중한 자리에 시간을 내어주셔서 참석해주셔서 감사드리고요. 먼저 저희가 오늘 아침에 저희가 이제 가질 이 순서는 올해가 이제 민족학교가 25살이 되는 해거든요. 25살이 되는 청년으로서 그동안 이제 부족한 것도 많았고 많이 더 노력해야 되는 그런 아쉬움들도 많이 남는 그런 이제 과거를 되돌아보면서 어떤 그런 생각들을 하는 해인 것 같아요. 그래서 저희가 앞으로 좀 더 많은 일들을 하고 또 그런 일들을 위해 노력하기 위해서 좀 더 힘을 저희가 내야 되잖아요. 이렇게 힘을 낼 때 과연 그런 힘은 앞으로 또 한 발자국 더 나아갈 수 있는 힘은 어떻게 나올 수 있을까 생각하면서 그럼 처음에 민족학교가 어떻게 시작됐는가, 처음같이 초심같이 새롭게 시작하는 그런 마음들을 한번 되돌아보고 꼭 민족학교뿐만이 아니지만 살면서 그런 것들이 다 있는 것 같아요. 아주 어려움도 있고 힘든 일도 있지만 처음에 각오했던 일들, 처음에 다짐했던 그런 그때의 그 생각들을 다시 하면서 지금 내가 겪고 있는 이런 어려움들, 이런 힘든 것들은 아무것도 아니지, 더 나아갈 수 있지, 더 한번 해보자, 어떤 그런 생각들이 드는 것 같아요. 지금 저희 아까 좀 80년대 그런 상황 영상들을 좀 보셨는데 좀 과격하죠? 지금 요즘에는 많이 듣지 못하는 뭐 통일, 뭐 자주, 민주 그런 얘기들이 참 많이 나오는 것 같아요. 그래서 지금 상황에서는 되게 좀 어색하기도 하고 한편으로는 되게 이제 생소하기도 한 그런 단어들인데, 근데 28년 전에 좀 그때의 상황은 그랬던 것 같아요. 되게 힘들고 어렵고 왜 이런 얘기를 드리냐면은 최근에 제가 이제 신문을 볼 기회가 있었는데, 보통 제가 신문을 보면은 이제 글은 잘 안 읽고 이제 사진만 보는데 되게 이제 강하게 가슴에 남는 사진을 최근에 하나 본 기억이 납니다. 그 사진이 어떤 사진이었냐면 버마, 지금은 이제 미얀마라 그러죠. 버마의 그 머리를 곱게 깎으신 이제 승려분이 이제 그런 군인한테 질질 끌려가면서도 이제 사인 하나, 이제 아웅산 수지를 석방하라 하는 그런 사진 기사가 한 몇 달 전에 나왔던 것 같아요. 그래서 이제 그런 버마 지역에서 그런 그런 군사 독재에 반대하는 그런 어떤 그런 살아있는 목소리들을 이제 사진으로 이제 담은 것 제가 보면서 참 강한 그런 인상을 받았는데, 근데 지금이 2008년, 지금 오늘 살아가는 이 세상에는 지구 곳곳에는 좋은 일도 많이 있지만 참 가슴 아프고 여기서 살아가는 저희들로서는 상상하기 힘든 그런 일들도 참 많이 있는 것 같아요. 그런 의미에서 28년 전에 우리나라에서도 80년 5월 18일 날 그런 민주화를 외치는 그런 시민들의 그런 목소리를 이제 군인들이 이제 탱크를 밀어붙이면서 총을 쏘면서 많은 사람들을 이제 학살시키면서 그런 일들이 생겼고, 그리고 28년이 그 당시에는 이제 많은 그런 5.18 얘기, 민중항쟁, 뭐 민주화 얘기를 하면 뭐 빨갱이, 폭도 그런 얘기들을 많이 했는데, 지금 20년이 거의 이제 두세기가 지난 지금에는 민주화 운동의 역사, 민주화 인사, 그리고 또 이제 5.18 항쟁이 이제 국가 기념일로 되는 그런 참 많은 변화들, 참 상상할 수 없었던 그런 변화들이 지금 이제 생기는 걸 보면서 참 역사라는 게 대단하구나. 당시 28년 전에는 빨갱이로 듣던 빨갱이로 손가락질 받던 분들이 지금은 민주화 인사로 역사에 이제 자리매김을 하는 이제 그런 역사의 그런 과정 속에 사는 것들을 보면서 참 변화라는 게 참 무섭구나 하는 것들 느끼는데요. 그런 상황 속에서 여기 해외에서도 미주에서도 보통 이렇게 이민 나와 살면 좀 더 우리 조국의 문제에 대해서 관심을 갖고 우리 조국이 좀 더 잘 되고 평화롭고 아름답기를 바라는 마음들이 다 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 뭐 외국에 나가면 더 애국자가 된다는 말이 있는데 당시 이제 80년대 이제 국내의 그런 엄청난 상황을 보면서 이 미주 지역의 많은 그 분들이 어떻게 그런 일이 생길 수가 있는가, 우리가 이런 고통받고 있는 우리 그 조국을 위해서 우리가 해외에서나마 좀 이런 조국의 상황을 알리고 조국이 좀 더 평화롭고 인권이 존중받는 세상이 되면 좋겠다 하는 차원으로 많은 일들을 했습니다. 그런 취지로 민족학교도 생겼고 민족학교를 통해서 어떻게 보면 청년 그런 그 단체 한국청년연합 또 한겨레 동포연합이라고 하는 그런 단체들이 생겼는데요. 그런 활동들을 통해서 나름대로 이런 해외에서 조국의 어떤 민주화, 조국의 인권 그런 활동을 하시면서 특별한 일은 아니지만 그런 일들이 특별한 일은 아니지만 또 아무나 하는 일은 아닌 것 같아요. 그리고 아주 화려한 건 또 아니지만 어떻게 보면 또 소중한 일들을 해오신 이제 세 분을 좀 모시고 아주 무거운 얘기보다는 진짜 어떻게 그런 활동에 참여하게 되셨는지 그런 얘기들을 좀 이렇게 부담 없이 같이 좀 이렇게 나누고 좀 이렇게 배우는 이제 그런 시간을 좀 가졌으면 하고요. 제가 서두에 좀 말이 너무 길었는데요. 오늘 이 자리는 제가 제일 사랑하는 분들이 오셨습니다. 여기 시민보씨 빼고 시민보씨는 제가 제일 존경하시는 분이고 제가 제일 존경하고 사랑하시는 세 분을 모시고 좀 그 당시 상황 지금하고는 너무 많이 틀린 것 같아요. 그렇지만 그 당시 상황을 좀 보면서 그런 힘들었던 상황에서도 좀 어떠한 그런 생각으로 어떠한 기회로 어떤 이런 일들을 또 하시고 오늘 이 자리까지 오시게 되셨는지 같이 한번 좀 얘기를 들어보고 얘기 좀 들어보고 싶은데요. 먼저 아까 여기 우리 소개를 다 하셨으니까 각자 이제 말씀하시면서 이제 하시겠지만 여기 시민보 씨, 그다음에 이제 이성옥 씨, 이제 이준식 씨 이제 세 분이 오셨는데요. 일단은 좀 잠깐 간단하게나마 저희가 간단히 처음에 이제 그 사진 영상을 보면서 좀 생소하기도 하고 약간 좀 어색하기도 한 그런 사진들이라고 느끼신 분들도 많이 계실 것 같아요. 그래서 좀 당시 80년대의 우리나라의 상황, 그 다음에 좀 그리고 여기 동포사회, 미국의 그 당시 상황은 좀 어땠는지 잠깐 좀 먼저 한번 질문을 좀 한번 드리고 거기에 대해 좀 얘기를 들어보는. 그래서 좀 먼저는 좀 첫 번째 우리 십자가를 매주실 시민보님께 좀 약간 질문을 좀 드려보도록 하겠습니다.
제가 1980년 당시는 아주 어린 학생이었기 때문에 70년대 상황에 대해서 이렇게 상세하게 상세한 얘기를 드릴 입장은 또 여기 와 계신 어르신분들이 저보다는 더 많이 하시고 그리고 제가 79년에 이민을 왔기 때문에 이 80년대 동포 여기 사회에 대해서도 뭐 그냥 그 어린 눈으로 본 것 이외에는 특별하게 상세한 얘기를 드리기는 어려울 것 같은데 하여튼 그 시대를 살았다는 이유 때문에 짧게나마 오늘 순서가 짧은 시간이지만 이기 때문에 짧게나마 얘기 드리겠습니다. 그리고 제가 이 중에서 영어를 제일 못하기 때문에 우리말로 제 발제 부분은 해줬으면 좋겠다고 부탁이 있어가지고 잘 못하는 우리말로라도 조금 얘기해드리겠습니다. 지금 아까 그 시작 부분에 이현숙 그 씨가 개회하면서 얘기했지만 그 2주 잘 살기 위해서 우리는 지금 많은 민중들의 이주, 이제는 세계적으로 일어난 이주가 진행되고 있는데, 코리아는 그 당시 다른 제3세계에 비해서 좀 더 빨리 산업화 그리고 이주 부분이 시작된 것 같습니다. 그 이유는 그 냉전의 격전지, 이 한반도는 냉전의 격전지였고, 그거는 단순히 어떤 군사적인 대립만이 아닌 남북 간에 누가 빨리 근대화 산업화하느냐는 경쟁이 진행됐기 때문에 다른 지금 현재 고통을 받고 있는 여러 민족이나 국가에 비해서 먼저 그런 산업화의 과정을 겪었습니다. 그래서 70년대를 보면 이 농촌에서 도시로 우리 젊은 그 당시 젊은이들은 공장에 취직을 하기 위해서 도시로 공업지대로 이주를 하는 과정이고, 그게 나아가지고 이 인력 수출이라는 이름안에 그 당시 80년 윤대중 씨는 너무 어렸기 때문에 기억이 안 났겠지만, 저는 아직도 학교 가면 항상 기억나는 게 그 100억 달러 수출, 그리고 1000달러 수입, 그것만 이루어지면 세상이 다 바뀌는 줄 알고 그거를 목표로 모든 것이 다 진행됐죠. 근데 지금 현재 마찬가지로 그 산업화의 진행 과정은 박정희 그 군부 세력에 의해 가지고 철저하게 폭력적인 형태를 띠고 진행됐습니다. 그래서 그 이주는 농촌에서 도시만이 아니고 우리가 자라나고 살아야 됐던 한반도에서 해외로도 같이 병행돼서 일어났습니다. 그래서 다들 아시겠지만 이 건설 노동자로서 중동에, 농업 노동자로서 중남미에, 광부로서 간호사로서 독일에, 입양으로서 그것도 배급 수출의 한 부분이라고 저는 생각하는데, 입양이라는 명목하에 이 어린애들이 주로 미국이죠. 미국, 유럽, 그 다음에 국가 정책으로 어느 부분이 이루어졌던 기지촌 운영, 그리고 기생관광 등을 통한 매매춘을 통해서도 그런 100억 달러를 수입하기 위해서 진행됐던 시기였습니다. 그거는 단순히 아까 얘기했지만 굉장히 제가 느낄 때는 어린 시절쯤에 굉장히 어떤 폭력적인 상황으로 이루어졌고, 모르신다 우리 역사 청산이 안 돼서 그런지 제가 1964년에 태어나서 79년 이 미국으로 이민할 때까지 항상 학교 다닐 때 교복 입고 다녔고, 머리 빡빡 머리 밀고 다녔고, 학교 들어갈 때 항상 격리했고, 그냥 사회 전반적으로 어떤 폭력적인 하여튼 그런 것을 기반으로 해가지고 이 해외 동포사회도 이루어졌고, 70년대 들어와가지고는 많은 중앙상층 그리고 지식인들의 이 해외로서 이민들이 이루어졌고, 그래서 그런 그 정도면 그런 상황에서 저희들 5.18 전 부분이 그렇게 형성됐던 생각이
예, 그리고 제가 하여튼 20년 전 얘기, 30년 전 얘기, 그런 얘기들을 이제 하려고 하니까 갑자기 이제 오늘을 살다가 과거로 돌아가는 게 쉬운 일은 아닌 것 같아요. 그렇지만 그 당시 다 우리 어르신분들 다 당시 어려웠던 상황 속에서 다 사셨던 분들이시니까 다들 이제 뭐 말이 필요 없고 다 느끼시는 얘기들이신 것 같아요. 느끼시는 것 같고 정신없이 이제 저희 나라가 많은 그런 그 경제 성장이라는 이름하에 엄청 빠르게 진행되어 왔지 않습니까? 그런 속에서 이제 어떤 군사 독재, 쿠데타 그런 어떤 여러 가지 정치적으로도 힘든 일들이 이제 많이 있었는데요. 그런 국내 상황 속에서 많은 분들이 저희들이 이제 미국에 이제 좀 더 잘 살아보기 위해서 가족을 위해서 자녀들을 위해서 이제 미국으로 와서 이제 이민을 살다가 그 당시 이제 80년대 그런 그 우리나라의 어떤 그런 5.18 광주에서 어떤 시민들이 그렇게 총에 맞아 죽고 우리나라 자기 군인들한테 이렇게 학살되는 모습을 보면서 우리 해외 동포들도 많은 그런 참 충격과 어떻게 보면 가슴 아픈 그런 것들을 많이 경험했을 것 같아요. 그러는데 당시 그 80년대에 그런 조국의 상황을 보시면서 어떠한 그런 생각들 그리고 그런 조국의 상황을 어떻게 접하셨는지 그러면서 좀 어떤 이민사도 개인적으로 어떻게 이런 한국에서 하시다가 해외로 이민을 가셨는지 좀 말씀을 좀 세 분께서 해주시면 좋을 것 같은데 먼저 저기 우리 이진숙 씨부터 좀 말씀을 좀 해주시면.
갑자기 한국말 할게. 내가 영어로 할게요. My Korean's really bad, so I'm going to speak in English. Actually, I immigrated with my family when I was 7. So unlike Imbo and Smogum here, we immigrated to Canada. The reason for us to immigrate to Canada at the time was because there was a closing of the number of quotas in the U.S. Originally, my parents wanted to immigrate to the U.S., but the quotas were all met to the U.S., so we actually immigrated to Canada. And when Taejun was talking about the Gwangju uprising, actually it's an event that impacted our family in a personal way because my father's actually hometown is Gwangju. And my recollections, even though in 1980, at the time I was 16, was I 16? No, I'm sorry, I can't remember. No. So I was 14, not that old. What I do remember was that when the Gwangju uprising happened, there was my father and also other members of the Honam Hangwe, which is the association for the Jeollado region. They were, of course, clearly outraged because and then a lot of it was their families, and so they actually organized an impromptu demonstration at that time, a commemoration. And the reason it stuck in my mind, even at the time, was that suddenly we had a lot of visits from the Korean consulate in Toronto. And we had a lot of visits from at the time, the KCIA. They would come to our house frequently and talk to my father. So I had memories of that. And I also had memories of my father being outcast in the Canadian community. And they couldn't find a place to hold the commemoration. In fact, the first commemoration they could do was actually in the park, in a public park, because no church, Korean church or Korean community would allow the commemoration to happen because of so much pressure from the consulate. So that's my first recollection, actually, of the Gwangju uprising. But I wasn't as active in the Korean American or Korean Canadian movement for the democratic movement in Korea until actually during college. Before that, I was more active in the anti-apartheid movement. Because I think what people have to sort of think about the time is that during the 80s and 90s, it wasn't just Korean liberation struggle. It's the liberation struggle of many countries. The Philippines, South Africa, El Salvador, Nicaragua. It was a time that was very, in the sense that Taejun mentioned about Burma, and we have the struggles of Burma and Tibet, free Tibet at the moment. But at that time in the 80s and 90s, there were many, many liberation struggles. And so many communities who were living in the United States and in Canada were part of those liberation struggles to support the democratic movements in their home country. So Korea was just one part of that movement that was happening. And in terms of, even though I lived in Canada, I think the one thing to remind about the US at the time was the Reagan era. And Reagan, very conservative president basically dismantled whatever progress or whatever positive things that came out from the struggles in the 60s and 70s. So it is an era that in some ways, because of the consequences of Reagan, that's why the movement, I mean the immigration movement and a lot of the progressive movements are trying to catch up right now. And so I think people have to think in the context of 80s and 90s, that was the atmosphere. So I remember when I actually moved, after becoming a member of YKU Canada, moving to Washington, D.C., my recollections in the streets of D.C. was all these posters about here's a forum on the liberation movement in El Salvador, here's another forum on Nicaragua, here's another forum on Guatemala and Haiti. And so that was the atmosphere at that time. And so as each organizations were working on support the democratic movement in their home country, there was also a sense of solidarity amongst the liberation struggles, where we recognized that we had to work together. And then also that the U.S. played such an integral role because of the U.S. foreign policy. It impacted all of these countries. And so those were my recollections at that time.
저희가 지금 시간이 좀 그래서요. 일단은 더 자세한 얘기는 워크숍으로 할 거고요. 지금 좀 말씀해 주시면서 당시 상황, 좀 이민 오시게 된 계기 하시면서 한청년에 가입하시면서 좀 어떠한 그런 기억들이 남는 것 부분도 좀 두 분께서 좀 말씀해 주시고 더 자세하고 살아있는 얘기들은 더 워크숍에서 저희가 좀 더 들어보면 좋을 것 같겠습니다.
Also speak in English. I'll try to be quick, but I just want to start out by saying that I am a product of the church. I'm a daughter of a Methodist pastor from Korea who went to Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So from 67 to 1970, we as a whole family lived in Vietnam. So I've experienced as a child. I was 8 years old when I went in '67. Saw the ravages of war, and I remember my father saying that war is not the answer, and we would be praying, and he would be preaching about the fact that here we are in this situation of war, but this is not the answer. And he would pray for reunification of Korea. So praying was the main thing, you know, in the church community about our country, about Vietnam, about the world, and about world peace. So having had some of that initial grounding about the fact that peace does not come about through war was so deeply rooted in me. And coming to the United States in 1970, as a young person, I was 11, and seeing this thing called racism, and this was something even worse than I thought in my young mind than war. So there was this thing about racism that I had never known about or experienced in Korea that I saw here. And with that, there was also a little bit of learning about class and the separation and segregation. And I learned about civil rights and the struggle of the African Americans in this country. And so there were a lot of questions that I had. And the fact, you know, about I guess growing up learning that there needs to be struggles of people to overcome all kinds of oppression and poverty and war. So when I was in college in 80 I was in college. And by the way, the college that I was in, I went to Occidental College here in LA. Barack Obama at the time was at Occidental College, and now I remember, but I didn't know he was going to be the figure that he is now. But during that time actually, we were the college was trying to divest, or there was a movement to divest from South Africa. So I remember him also being very actively involved, and he was a great organizer. And so it's like looking back and saying, wow, you know, there I had seen him then. But anyway, in 1980, I had heard that there was the Gwangju People's Uprising. I hadn't heard about the massacre. I did a proposal to my school to say I'd like to go to Korea. So Gwangju incident happened in May, and I was in Korea in July. When I went there, I learned that the students and the Korean people there in South Korea had not learned about what had happened. Some knew that something had happened, but they didn't know about the 200 people being massacred. Now eventually when I came back, I learned through other channels, for instance Japan, in Japan they were beginning to do some reporting of what had happened. So in Korea, there was a very tight control of the media, so the news didn't get around as fast. And I began to question a lot of the way the government was sort of getting the word out. And so basically, I have had many questions about why does this happen? I was also very much empowered after having spoken to students that were in the student movement when I was there, that it is possible that this organizing and changing and the efforts for social transformation is possible through the bottom up, the grassroots way. And Korea had never experienced a democratically elected government. So that was something that was deeply sort of yearning in my heart. And I was beginning to attain a sense of identity, a sense of who I am and what I should do. So in 1986, when I was in the East Coast, I happened to meet several people that were already beginning to, that had already formed the movement here and overseas for democracy in Korea and reunification of Korea. So I actually then joined Young Koreans United and began to learn, and first to learn about the history of Korea and all the involvements that the U.S. had in Korea. And I was actively involved in really educating those in this country about the U.S. intervention, the nuclear weapons that are in Korea, and all of the troop and the intervention overall. So it was a very sort of enlightening and empowering experience for me as an individual, as a Korean American. And it was one of those moments of realizing that people's power, the movement from the grassroots and the organizing that can happen by the people was going to be actually possible. And of course, our Yoon Han-bong 선배님 was the driving force that changed my life, but that was actually changing the course of history and for what people here in this country can do. And so the enlistment of so many other groups, other international movements, then came together, and we were able to carry out the different aspects of the work.
감사합니다. 지금 시간이 한 2, 3분 되나요? 예?
30초, 30분.
한 2분만 잠깐 얘기하고 더 좀 살아있는 얘기는 워크샵에서.
청년에 대해서 나름대로 좀 소중하게 간직하고 있는 것이 활동을 하면서
그 중간중간 그 윤한봉 선배님에 대해서 얘기가 나오는데 아직까지도 지금 돌아가신 지 지금 이제 1년이 채 안 됐고 여러 가지 본인께서 본인의 활동이나 업적을 많이 밖으로 안 드러내신 분이기 때문에 많은 것들이 알려지지 않은 부분들이 많습니다. 근데 여기 오신 많은 어르신들이나 여기 계시는 분들 통해 가지고 그 과정에서 좀 나중에 좀 상세하게 설명이 돼야 될 부분이 많지만 하여튼 저희들이 뭐 지역적으로는 해외라는 미국이라는 상황에서 활동을 했지만 실질적으로 그 윤한봉 선생님이라는 분을 통해 가지고 많은 분들이 그런 얘기들을 하시더라고요. 미국에 와서 재미난 청년을 보면 그 70년도에 특히 이제 광주 지역에서 있었던 민주화 운동을 했던 청년들을 보는 거예요. 그래서 사실 미국에서 일어난 자연 발생적인 그런 이 운동이라기보다도 윤선빈을 통해 가지고 그 당시 70년도에 그 5월 항쟁을 주도하셨던 그런 그 활동가들의 어떤 정신이나 어떤 삶의 자세들이 미국에 와서 윤선빈을 통해서 실현되고 사실 거기에 많이 저희 청년들로서 많이 감동을 받았습니다. 저렇게 열정을 가지고 어떤 민족에 대한 애정을 가지고 살아갈 수 있을까? 그것이 굉장히 큰 감동으로 남았고 우리도 미주지만 우리도 뭐 미국에 왔다는 그 자체가 어떤 민족이라는 그런 계획과는 조금 차이가 있었지만 그러한 모습들을 따르고 싶었고 그 속에서 어떤 조국의 문제, 그다음에 인류사에서 일어나는 모순 부분을 해결하는 하나의 일꾼이 되어서 하는 참여였죠.
이렇게 귀하신 시간 내주셔서 이렇게 말씀해 주신 세 분께 감사드리고 더 자세한 거는 저희가 이번에 다음에 이어지는 그 워크숍 때 더 자세하게 질문도 좀 받고 얘기도 나누는 그런 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
We're going to go right into the second panel, and the second panel is called Immigration in the U.S. And what I'm going to do is introduce all three speakers in sequence. Two of them, I believe, at least have PowerPoint presentations, so they'll be speaking from the podium, and we're going to be looking at the slides here to understand more. Our first speaker will be Jean Batalova, and she's from the Migration Policy Institute, and she'll be providing an overview of immigration in the U.S., what the important trends and data are that will ground our understanding and discussions for the day. Our speaker following that will be Maria-Elena Hincapie from the National Immigration Law Center. She'll be talking more about the political and legislative climate today to better understand the challenges that face us as we look for the prospects for immigration reform. And our final speaker wrapping up will be Joanne Lee from the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles and also a board member of the Korean Resource Center. And Joanne will talk about the specific subpopulation of immigrant workers, those who are trafficked. All the presentations will be in English, but the Q&A session will be open for everyone. So once we have the three presentations, we'll have all the speakers come back up here on this stage to have a short question and answer session. And there will be a related workshop as well on this topic after this panel itself. So first I'd like to welcome Jean Batalova, and I'd like to say also all the bios are in the program book, so I invite you to please read through and better understand who our speakers are. Jean?
I'm Jana Batalova from the Migration Policy Institute, and it's my pleasure and an honor to be here and speak to you at the event. I should use the technology, right? My job is to tell you everything I know about global and US immigration in 12 minutes or so I'll speak fast. Please bear with me. And let's start with a couple of key migration facts. According to United Nations estimates, there are nearly 200 million individuals who account for 3% of the world population who are considered to be international migrants. However, most of the people in the world never cross an international border. Those who do, however, they usually go to places not far away from their place of birth. For example, from Korea to Japan, or from Turkey to Germany. Then others do go far from their countries, following the prior political, linguistic, historical, cultural ties, such as from the Philippines and Korea to Canada and the United States, or from Morocco and Algeria to France. And others are descendants of ethnic migrants who now repatriate back to their countries of origin, such as Japanese Brazilians who now go back to Japan. And people migrate for a variety of reasons. Many are in search of better lives for themselves and for their families. Others move to join their families, and still others flee from the oppressive governments, political turmoil, and natural disasters. Governments of origin and destination countries play a major role in initiating, managing, and often mismanaging migration flows. Powerful networks connect immigrants and other actors, such as relatives and employers, government agencies, recruiters, and transporters in the fascinating phenomenon we call international migration. 28 countries in the world host about 75% of all international migrants. And demographers predict that in the next 25 years or so, international migration will only intensify. And that is because of the powerful demographic pressures in both origin and destination countries, because of the demand for workers across the entire skill continuum, and the powerful effect of the ever-deepening and more sophisticated networks. What are the top countries that have the largest number of immigrants? I think it's... All right, we're back on track. Perhaps it comes at no surprise that the country with the largest number of immigrants in the world is the country where we are now, the United States. Think about this. The United States population accounts for 5% of the global population, but 20% of all international migrants worldwide are in the United States. More than half of all international migrants are just in 10 countries that are listed here. And of course, international migration is not a one-way street. Estimates suggest that countries such as Russia, China, Mexico, India, Germany, and the UK are the top sending countries. Interestingly enough, and somewhat paradoxically, some countries such as Russia, Germany, and the UK, they are simultaneously places of destination, and a large number of immigrants leave these countries. As we saw on the previous charts, of all countries in the world, the US has the largest number of immigrants. Immigrants account for 1 in 8 persons residing in the US. However, other countries have a larger share of immigrants in their total population. And look at the top 3 Gulf region countries. More than 60 to 70% of the entire population in these countries are migrants. Often these are guest workers from Southeast and Western Asia, who are there temporarily with few rights to permanent settlement or citizenship and locked in low-end jobs. Typically, international migrants don't choose randomly where to go to. On the contrary, because of the variety of economic, social, linguistic, and other reasons, they migrate to certain countries, and within these countries, they go to certain cities. This map shows the top 19 global cities that have at least 1 million immigrants. And if you count with me, 8 of these cities, almost a half, are in the United States. Who are the immigrants who live in these global cities? Well, since we're in Los Angeles, let's take a look at Los Angeles first. Of the 3.4 million immigrants who live in Los Angeles, 44% came from Mexico. The next largest origin groups are El Salvador, the Philippines, Guatemala, Korea, and others. But notice that each of the 9 top countries have a small per single country share. In contrast, in Toronto, no single country dominates. The 2.1 million immigrants who reside in Toronto are from a diverse range of countries. Many of them are from Asia and Europe. Well, let's switch gears to the United States and take a little bit of a historical view on the trends, immigration trends in the United States during the last 150 years or so. These 2 lines show the number of immigrants. The green line shows the number of immigrants in the United States over time, and the blue dotted line shows the share or the percent of immigrants in the United States. The nearly 38 million immigrants who reside in the United States today is an absolute high historical figure in terms of the absolute numbers. As you can see, the numbers rise sharply since the mid-1960s. But as the dotted blue line indicates, immigrants now represent a smaller share, only 12.5% of the entire US population, than immigrants represented at any given point in time, and especially in the in the late 19th and early 20th century, when almost 15% of US population were immigrants. Many factors affected the course of these 2 lines. As you see, they are not flat, they are not going up and down, but rather fluctuates. And one of the factors that were behind the fluctuations is the 1965 changes to US immigration law that removed so-called national origin quotas. These quotas were set in the 1920s and led to virtually no immigration from countries outside of Europe. And that affected, of course, the composition of immigrants who resided by 1960s. So as you can see from the bar chart, the immigrant composition in 1960s was predominantly European. 75% of immigrants were from Europe. But by 2006, it changed dramatically. Half immigrants today are from Latin America and 27% are from Asia. Just quickly, let's look at the composition of Asian immigrants. In 1960s, Asian immigrants account for 5% of immigrants, and 3 decades later, it increased 5-fold from less than 500,000 to 10 million immigrants. Just very quickly, in terms of where immigrants live in the United States, the 6 states in dark red are the traditional immigrant states. Of course, California is one of them. 66% of immigrants live in just 6 traditional states. But it's the states in yellow that experience the rapid increase in their immigrant populations. Very quickly, and immigrants in the United States have what demographers call a binomial distribution. They are 32% have no high school degree and 30% have college degree or higher. And it translates in the type of jobs that they are working in. Immigrants are 1 in 5 of low-wage workers, but on the other hand, they are 1 in 4 doctors, 2 in 5 medical scientists, and others. No discussion of immigrants today can avoid the topic of undocumented immigrants. You might have seen the sign when you drive on 5 freeway towards San Diego. About 12 million immigrants in the United States live without so-called papers. They have no authorization to be here. Many of them are kids, many of them are families. And the important point to note is that today the undocumented immigrants, in terms of the size, are similar to the size of naturalized citizens and the green card holders. All right, I'm gonna skip a couple of charts because I'm running out of time. And there is no doubt that the presence of the 12 million undocumented immigrants is the major bone of contention in the debate over immigration reform and about the benefits and challenges of immigrants in general. However, this is not the only item on the agenda. Increasing high school rates and college graduation rates, gaining sufficient English skills, recognizing foreign credentials of immigrants who have credentials from outside of the United States, and investing into the future workforce are the issues that have deep and profound implications for the economic and social future and success for children of immigrants, for immigrants themselves, and for the US society in general. And where is the federal leadership on that? Well, the Congress is in the apparent stalemate over how to handle the broken immigration system. However, someone has to push for answers to the following questions. Yes, that slide is missing, but the questions are, will immigrants be able to offset labor shortages associated with the increasing retirement of baby boomers? Will they be able to provide medical and home care to the increasing numbers of elderly? In terms of the national security, how to address the present issue of 12 million undocumented immigrants in a comprehensive, economically feasible, and most importantly, humane way? How to secure the border from those who wish us harm, but keep the door open to those who wish us well? In terms of the social, cultural implications, what are the integration prospects for immigrants and their children? Are they learning English? And if they're not, what are the barriers to that? How can we help them to improve their English skills, which is so important for the economic and social mobility? And if integration is a two-way street, is there a serious commitment on both sides to assure that the newcomers can find their own and contribute to all of our American dream? Thank you.
Buenos días. My name is Maria Elena Incapié, and I am honored to have been asked to speak to you this morning and to celebrate with you this memorial, and in particular to let you know that these issues are personally very important to me. I am an immigrant from Colombia, South America. My family immigrated to the state of Rhode Island, so all the way on the other side of the United States, to work in the textile factories in Rhode Island. And I slowly have made my way over to Los Angeles to work at the National Immigration Law Center, which is based here in Koreatown. And so again, the celebration that you are doing here today and the issues that affect the Korean community and all immigrants are very important to me personally and professionally. I have been asked to speak this morning about the conditions that affect low-wage workers, and as you heard from the presentation just now, low-wage workers, 1 out of every 5 low-wage workers in the United States are foreign-born. And the issues and challenges that face them are many, and I think, again, Jean explained what some of those challenges are. I'm going to be focusing on the exploitation that workers face, and I won't be talking about the most egregious type of exploitation, which is trafficking, since our next speaker, Joanne, will be speaking about that as well. So to begin with, it's important to understand the context, right? The push and pull factors that bring immigrants here to the U.S. Again, there are many, many reasons why people come to the United States or migrate to other countries, but we all know that jobs is one major reason, regardless of whether you came for political reasons, for family reunification, but one of the most important central tenets of migration is that people are coming to look for better jobs, for better economic opportunities, better educational opportunities for their family, and oftentimes for survival, economic survival, because many people do not have that in their home countries. And so lack of economic opportunities in the sending countries is often what pushes people, often forces people to migrate to the United States. And on the other hand, we have corporate interests, businesses in the United States who feel that they either do not have enough workers here to fill the jobs, or who simply want low-wage workers and are not willing to pay fair wages and provide benefits and workers' rights, leaving U.S. workers not willing to take those conditions, and that pulls people into the United States. So it's critical to understand that in order to understand the situation affecting immigrant workers, we have to look at both labor and immigration policies, and it's really that intersection which is what plays out in people's lives every day. And there are many unintended consequences. The people who write our policies and who sign our policies into law in the United States are so far removed from the realities of what those laws will do and the implications and how they will play out in people's lives that we've seen many unintended consequences, and I will talk about that in the next few minutes. So it's important to begin with 1986, because the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 is really the landmark law that changed the playing field in the United States, and that we are still today living with the implications of that. As we know, 1986, many people think of it as the law that provided amnesty or that legalized several million workers. But the other thing that the immigration law of 1986 did was that it created employer sanctions. So for the first time, Congress said it's unlawful, it's illegal for an employer to knowingly hire somebody who is undocumented, who doesn't have papers or authorization to work in the United States. And the thinking behind that in Congress was that if we made it illegal for an employer to hire somebody who's undocumented, that would slow down the undocumented migration to the United States. But in reality, that has not happened, as we've seen, because again, for economic, environmental, political reasons, people have continued coming here. And instead, what we have seen is that there are unintended consequences, like people need to work. And so workers are buying false documents. They are very prevalent, right? We can walk down the street to MacArthur Park and buy false documents here in Los Angeles or in other parts of our city, and that's true all over the United States. Employers also know this, right? Employers hire workers and don't ask for papers. Or employers will tell workers where to buy the papers or supply them and charge them in order to get their job. There are many different levels to this. Finally, there's a lot of discrimination, right? An employer would prefer to hire somebody that doesn't look illegal. I look around this room, I would not be able to tell who is really documented or undocumented unless you are discriminating and only looking at people based on their skin color or their accent or whether they speak English or not. But today we continue having an increase in employment discrimination because employers are often afraid that if they hire somebody who may be undocumented, they will be sanctioned or penalized by the government. It is also important to understand that immigrant workers, especially if they are undocumented, may face retaliation by the employers who know that they could use the fact of deportation against the workers, and I will talk a little bit more about that. So some immigrant workers, looking at the labor law side, have limited protections just because of the job that they do. So for example, if you are a temporary worker, if you work at a temporary agency, you will just get you're entitled to minimum wage, but you're not entitled to other types of benefits like workers' compensation and other things because you are going through this agency. Or if you are a day laborer, you're often just working for the day and not for a particular employer that's providing all of these other benefits. And often many day laborers who are looking for work just for the day are considered independent contractors, and they truly are independent contractors. They are people with certain skills, they have their own tools, they have the ability to get jobs for particular clients at a time, but they don't have any other benefits either. You also have farm workers, agricultural workers, who are actually excluded from most of the laws except for minimum wage protections. So except for California, where we have a state law that allows agricultural workers to organize into a union, for example, farm workers around the rest of the country are not protected by the National Labor Relations Act. That is true of domestic workers as well. And what this has resulted in is that workers around the country of all nationalities, including US born, are organizing, right? So now we have a national day labor organizing network to try to organize and demand for the same rights. We have the United Farm Workers Union. We have other organizations that are organizing farm workers as well. We have now a National Domestic Workers Association that recently got formed, which is very, very exciting and very powerful since they are often some of the most vulnerable workers. But because of the barriers that immigrants face on the job, they are often very afraid to speak up. On the other hand, many immigrant workers are very politicized and very conscious about changing the conditions and that they do have rights as a human being, that they have certain human rights that they should be demanding. And so, unfortunately, though, employers try to use the fear of deportation and immigration raids, for example, as one of the consequences to try to keep workers exploited and depressed. And oftentimes we hear that immigrants are taking jobs away from immigrants and they are depressing wages and working conditions. Our perspective is the complete opposite, that it's companies, that it is employers that are violating the rights, that they are the ones who are depressing working conditions because they are refusing to give workers these rights as well as to hire U.S. workers in these jobs. And that it's important for all of us to organize together and to change these policies to lift up the working conditions for all workers, whether people have immigration status, work authorization, or not. Because my time is coming up as well, I will quickly just wrap up. We do have a workshop where we'll be going into some of these programs more specifically, but there are particular federal government programs that are making matters worse for immigrant workers on the job. And in particular, we look at the 1996 immigration law, which created an employment verification system, an electronic system called the Basic Pilot Program. It's now called E-Verify, which employers are using to try to document who is authorized to work. But this system has so many inaccuracies that, in fact, the people most affected by it are U.S. citizens, especially naturalized citizens, because of the mistakes. Similarly, there are letters from the Social Security Administration that, again, have many inaccuracies, or that employers, knowing that workers are undocumented, are using them to retaliate against them. And then I will just switch forward to the reality of what we're living now, probably the greatest challenge that we're facing in our communities right now. And here in Koreatown, we we have experienced this very strongly are immigration raids and immigration detentions, whether at the workplace or in people's homes, as we've seen our community members in Koreatown affected by this, and recently in February in Van Nuys in the Valley. And so we've seen over the last year and a half, record numbers of immigration raids and detentions happening, and we've seen a renewed effort by the federal government to crack down on immigrants. And the impact of this has been to tear families apart. We've had record numbers of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents detained as well as a result of racial profiling, and the number of violations that are happening at the hands of the immigration, customs, and enforcement agents is increasing every day. And so with that, I'll actually just end by inviting you all to a hearing that we are having here in Los Angeles on the 24th of June, and we have, these will be passed out to you, but this is a hearing that is being organized. It's the last one of a series of a national commission on ICE misconduct, on misconduct by the Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement Agency, and how they have been violating all of our community's rights, our civil rights, our constitutional rights, not just of undocumented immigrants. Again, the way that immigration raids are happening today, they are happening on, they're detaining U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, people with work authorization, and undocumented immigrants, completely violating their rights. So please join us. It's a public hearing. There will be speakers, both women and workers, men and women who were detained during these raids, and this will be, at the end of this hearing, one of the unions, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, will be putting together a report to Congress denouncing these violations. And so we invite all of you, and if any of you want to share testimony, please talk to me afterwards and we can figure out how to include you in the hearing as well. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Again, my name is